Hey everybody, welcome back to the program. Today I'll be reviewing the recently reissued Beatles on Capitol Records. This is the first 6 LPs in North America, and this coincides with the 60th anniversary of the Beatles' first tour of North America. This is the big release for the holiday season, and I will not be reviewing the box set. Check out this video to find out why. I'm purely talking about the first 6 LPs. Overall, I'm impressed. I was going into this without a lot of expectations, but I'm really happy to report. In fact, they even state this was cut from the original master tapes using a completely analog signal path. And, you know, I gotta say, I had a sigh of relief when I saw that this was pressed at MPO versus the Czech Republic. You know, GZ has quality control issues. Sometimes you get a great copy, sometimes you don't. These all felt good in the hand. The vinyl was flat and very quiet. So I'm very thankful for that. And I gotta say, for all of these releases, it's like the mud has been wiped away from the lens. Like suddenly everything is much clearer now. Like it's fuller, it's brighter. There's a better balance between the vocals and the instruments. When I would listen to my original copies, like if everything felt kind of funneled in, like not as broad in terms of like audio spectrum. Like it was very vocals heavy and then everything else was secondary. And in some cases, like on some songs, I couldn't even really discern where the bass or drums were. It was like they were just so buried down in the mix. And also there's surface noise and scratches and pops because these things are like 60 years old. And I think that was kind of the thing about these, is that as much as they are not what the Beatles intended, you know, they really are interesting albums on their own. And if you kind of separate them from the discography, you might actually enjoy these. And so like I had a lot of fun going back through these records, and you know, print quality wise, these are excellent. I was a little fearful because of that Beatles single collection that came out a couple of years ago where some of the covers were extremely pixelated. All of these look fantastic. It's only when you get like super close and you have an original to compare it to, then you start noticing like, oh, that's not as good. Oh, that one's got some pixelation. And then overall, I gotta say there's a lot more detail in the photos, especially the black and white photos. And then I love the fact that all these inserts have a photo of the tape box, and then you have a nice write-up by Bruce Spicer, and then more information, and then like the mastering notes and the credits. Like I love that attention to detail. Plus we have recreations of Capitol company sleeves, which is awesome. Now, all of these I notice are slightly smaller, like they're a little shrunk down for whatever reason. The only real big difference other than that is the color difference, and that could just be because different manufacturers were making them on the East Coast and West Coast, and maybe they used a different pressing than mine to recreate this blue color. By and large, they look fantastic, and it's a heavier paper. And then most of the album covers look better in these recreations. There's more detail, it's less contrasty. And then all the records come in polylined paper sleeves. Even the labels are faithfully reproduced. You know, you'll notice some variations depending on where your original pressing was made, because that's just how it was, man. Bruce Spicer has some great books where he shows like all the variations, like even with this color here, had like a couple different colors depending on if it was pressed on the West Coast or the East Coast. So I think with these recreations, they found a happy medium in terms of the recreation. So I don't think there's anything else specific to this release that I want to go over. I think the standout for me, you know, comparing this original mono copy to this new copy is just like, it's almost night and day. Like it just sounds so much better. Moving on to the Beatles' second album, it's almost identical, and in some cases a lot of the photos look a lot better, especially with Ringo here. You can tell, you can actually see his eyes, his hair has more detail. Now the only time I notice where original pressings look better is when you get this big text here. You start to see that it's a little soft, and you can just barely make out some pixelization. Again, I'm being nitpicking here. It's really not a big deal, and if you didn't have an original to compare it to, you probably wouldn't even know. Again, on the back here, I think the photos look so much better. And then if you look here, compare the miniature album cover, there's a lot more detail on the new pressing. And again, audio quality wise, sounds fantastic. All right, moving on to A Hard Day's Night. I gotta say, this is probably the best looking recreation cover. Everything about it just looks so much better on this recreation, even if it didn't have all these defects like this torn piece of paper. This just looks, it just pops, you know? And it even comes with a recreation company sleeve. And then even the labels look fantastic. And again, audio quality wise, this sounds great. It sounds more full. This one, even the opening chord on A Hard Day's Night just kind of sounded kind of dull, whereas this just sounded electric, man. It just pops. And even the instrumentals sound a lot better on this version. So yeah, this is a great addition to have. Now, something new might be the only cover where I think it was a bit of a misstep. I believe this is a colorized black and white photo. I'm not 100% sure on that, but you can tell like their faces look a lot clearer. But the place where it gets a little wonky is Ringo. Ringo is like nearly black and white here, but his hands are colored, whereas he looks a lot better here. He actually has skin tone here. So I don't know what happened there, but otherwise it looks great. And again, it's really faithful recreation. But in some cases, like these miniature photos, they just look a lot better. Now, this one, this one also came with the blue company sleeve. And again, audio quality wise, sounds great. Even though this is a later 1969 stereo pressing, I still love the sound of this. All right, moving on to Beatles 65. Overall, fantastic cover. And on the back here, looks really great. Now, the only place where this recreation doesn't look as good is in the EMI emblem. And if you look really closely, there's like these record grooves and then latitude and longitude lines, and it's just not as clear or sharp as it is on the original. This one has the orange inner sleeves. The color's a little closer, and then also, slightly smaller. But audio quality wise, this one just takes the cake over my original mono. It just, again, everything I said before applies to this pressing as well. And then finally, we have the Early Beatles. And initially I thought like, oh gosh, this looks terrible. Like, why did they do this? But then I looked at my original stereo copy and I was like, oh gosh, this looks way worse. Like, Paul looks super bug-eyed here. All the faces look really washed out. There's not a lot of detail. And the photo overall is, not very sharp. There's a lot of grain to it. So like this, I think looks a lot better. There's a lot more definition. They look less like wax statues and more like real people. On the back there, overall, the new pressing looks better, except when it comes to the EMI emblem there. Audio quality wise, just like the other ones, sounds fantastic. Really, really happy with all of these. And the Early Beatles came with a brown or like an olive company sleeve, and I couldn't find a comparable one to compare it to. But my guess is this looks very similar. It's just slightly smaller. So overall, I think these are great value for the money. They put a lot of attention to detail into these. The print quality is great. Sonically, they sound great. The mastering is top notch. And, as much as I was disappointed when these were initially announced, I wasn't that excited about them. I'm really glad I have these, because sort of an unintended takeaway from this was that I have this greater appreciation for these albums. When I first started collecting when I was a teenager, these were pretty easy to come by. They were relatively cheap, and so I would just buy them because I thought they were cool, and so I had multiple copies, but I didn't really pay them much attention because I knew these weren't what the Beatles intended. These were more like novelties, and it was just because they were cheap and I just wanted to have them. But listening to them now, I really appreciate the thought and effort that went into, the track listings of these albums. And, especially when you take a look at Meet the Beatles. I mean, that is an incredible introduction to the band to people who had never heard of them before. And you have all these amazing songs on one record, and they title it very aptly, Meet the Beatles. I mean, I know there was VJ, I know there was other things, but, for a lot of people, this was the first time they heard the Beatles in the United States. And it's really, really well done. I also gained this appreciation for this era of the Beatles, especially watching that Beatles 64 documentary. I normally just gravitate towards Rubber Soul on up, and I don't often go back to these songs, but listening to all these albums sort of rekindled this love of that early Beatles sound, because these guys are just oozing positivity, and it's full of joy and excitement, and there's just so much energy on these early records. It's just different as they got older, you know what I mean? Not that it's worse or bad or anything, it's just different. And I love listening to that. Even the ballad songs, you know what I mean? They're just like, it's so much, there's like a different kind of energy in them. And it was just fun. I really enjoyed them. So yeah, that being said, these aren't for everybody. These are a luxury. I think if you're still out there trying to collect all of the UK albums on vinyl, you don't need to pick these up. But if you're a longtime collector and you're looking for something new, or maybe you just want to revisit these are fun, man. Pick them up. You know, I think you can't go wrong. These are a great addition to your Beatles collection. All right, everybody, that will do it for today. I want to thank you all so much for watching, but I especially want to thank my members over on Patreon. I'm your Vinyl Geek, and I'll catch you on the flip side.